They said, "Come home, Mom. We need you for Thanksgiving." Those words hit me like warm honey after months of silence that had stretched thin as winter ice. My son Marcus hadn't called in 6 weeks, but there he was, voice soft and almost pleading through the phone, like a child asking for forgiveness without knowing what he'd done wrong. "The kids keep asking about your apple stuffing, Mom. Madison says nothing tastes right without it. It wouldn't be the same without you." I hung up and stared at my empty kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears like a bell that wouldn't stop chiming. At 73, feeling wanted was like finding water in a desert I'd been crossing for years, without realizing how thirsty I'd become. I booked the flight that same evening, hands trembling as I typed in my credit card number with the careful precision of someone afraid of making mistakes. $423 to fly from Phoenix to Denver. But what's money when your family finally calls you home? For 2 weeks, I planned with the devotion of a woman preparing for her own resurrection. I bought a new burgundy sweater, the kind that brings out the green in my eyes. Eyes that Henry used to say reminded him of sea glass. I practiced my stuffing recipe 3 times, writing down every measurement in my careful cursive, the same handwriting that once filled birthday cards and grocery lists when I still mattered to someone's daily life. I even got my hair done at Martha's salon, where she fussed over me like I was going to meet the president. "You look radiant, Dorothy," she said, her fingers gentle against my scalp, and for the first time in months, I believed her. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. It helps others find stories like this, and make sure you don't miss the next one. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning while I was watering my African violets, those stubborn little things that somehow keep blooming, despite my neglect. Marcus's voice sounded different through the receiver, rushed, almost businesslike, but still carrying enough warmth to melt the ice that had formed around my heart during the long months of silence. "Mom, I know we haven't talked much lately, but Gladder and I were discussing Thanksgiving." He paused and I held my breath like a child waiting for permission to hope again. "We really want you here. The kids have been asking about their grandmother's cooking, especially Madison. She keeps talking about that stuffing recipe of yours." His words fell into the quiet spaces of my kitchen like seeds into fertile ground, and I felt something inside me that had been dormant begin to stir. The way he said it, with that slight catch in his voice, made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I was more than an obligation or an afterthought. I set down my watering can with shaking hands, watching droplets fall from the violet leaves like tiny tears of joy. "Are you sure, honey? I don't want to impose on your family time." The words came out smaller than I intended, carrying all the weight of previous holidays, spent alone, microwaving turkey dinners while watching other families' celebrations flicker across my television screen like scenes from a life I used to know. Marcus laughed, and it sounded genuine enough to convince my starving heart. "Mom, you could never impose. Your family. Madison's been asking when she's going to see her grandmother again, and honestly, Sarah's been struggling with the cooking. We need you there." Need. That word settled into my chest like a warm stone, heating places that had been cold for so long, I'd forgotten they could feel anything at all. After hanging up, I sat in my favorite chair, the blue one Henry bought me for our 40th anniversary, now faded to the color of morning sky, but still sturdy enough to hold my hopes. I let myself imagine it. Thanksgiving dinner with voices filling the house like music I'd forgotten how to hear. Children's laughter echoing from rooms that had been too quiet for too long. My hands busy in someone else's kitchen again. Useful. Needed. Remembered. That evening I called my neighbor Mrs. Chen to ask if she'd water my plants while I was gone. "Going to see family," I told her, and the words tasted like honey on my tongue, sweet and golden, and real. She smiled and patted my hand with her soft, papery fingers that reminded me of autumn leaves. "That's wonderful, Dorothy. Family is everything." I nodded, feeling chosen and blessed for the first time in months, like a woman who still had a place in this world. I packed my suitcase like I was preparing for my own coronation, Every item chosen with the reverence of a woman who understood this might be her last chance to matter in someone's story. The burgundy sweater went in first, still bearing the faint scent of the department store where I'd tried it on 4 times, each time seeing a different woman in the mirror. One hopeful, one doubtful, one desperate, one finally brave enough to believe she deserved something beautiful. My good pearls followed, the ones Henry gave me for our 25th anniversary. Their luster dulled by time, but their meaning still luminous in my memory. I could almost feel his hands clasping them around my neck, his breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "Perfect. Just like you." These pearls had seen birthday parties and Christmas mornings, graduation ceremonies and wedding receptions. Now they would see another family gathering, another chance to be part of something larger than my own quiet existence. I folded my apron, the one with tiny strawberries that Henry always said made me look like a proper grandmother, and placed it carefully between layers of tissue paper that crinkled like whispered promises. At the bottom of my suitcase, wrapped like sacred relics, I placed a small wooden box containing handwritten recipe cards, stained with decades of love. Each card bore the fingerprints of countless family dinners, flour dusted into the paper fibers, splash marks from stirring spoons, the faded ink of my younger handwriting when my hands were steadier and my future seemed infinite. The night before my flight, I stood in my kitchen at 2 a.m, practicing the stuffing recipe one final time under the soft glow of the overhead light. My hands moved through the familiar motions with the muscle memory of a pianist playing a beloved song, dicing onions that made my eyes water with more than just their sharpness, crumbling sage leaves that released their earthy perfume like incense in a chapel of memory, mixing ingredients with the patience of a woman who understood that love could be measured in teaspoons and tablespoons. The smell filled my small kitchen, and for a moment, I could almost hear Henry's voice praising my cooking, could almost see my children young again at the kitchen table, faces smudged with flour, and hearts full of the certainty that their mother's hands could create magic from simple ingredients. Those were the days when I was the center of their universe, when my presence was assumed rather than requested, when love felt as natural and necessary as breathing. As I cleaned the mixing bowls, I found myself humming, actually humming, a song I hadn't thought of in years. It was something Henry used to sing while doing dishes, an old tune that meant nothing to anyone else, but everything to us. The melody felt rusty in my throat, like an unused door creaking open, but it was there, waiting all this time for a reason to emerge. Tomorrow I would have an audience for my songs again. The airport buzzed with the electric energy of people going places that mattered, and I felt part of that current for the first time in years. I moved through the terminal with careful purpose, checking my ticket 3 times and confirming my gate twice, my hands steady despite the flutter of anticipation in my chest. The burgundy sweater felt like armor against the morning chill, and my good shoes, the black ones with just enough heel to make me feel elegant, clicked confidently across the polished floor. The flight attendant who helped me stow my carry-on had the kind of gentle eyes that suggested she'd seen countless family reunions, countless journeys toward love. "Visiting family for the holiday?" she asked, and when I nodded, my whole face seemed to light up from within. How wonderful. There's nothing quite like being expected. Is there? She was right. The feeling of being expected, of knowing someone was counting the hours until your arrival, was intoxicating. During takeoff, I pressed my face to the small oval window and watched Phoenix shrink below me, the desert spreading out like a patchwork quilt, stitched together with roads and dreams. Somewhere up there in the vast blue sky, I was traveling toward my son, toward my grandchildren, toward a table that would hold my stuffing, and conversations that would include my voice. The plane climbed higher, and I felt my heart lift with it, carried by hope and the promise of belonging somewhere again. I sat next to a businessman who spent most of the flight typing on his laptop, but during a quiet moment he showed me a photo on his phone. Twin boys, maybe 9 years old, grinning with gap-toothed smiles that could light up a room. My sons, he said with the pride that only a parent understands, flying home to surprise them for Thanksgiving. We talked about children and the complicated mathematics of loving them from a distance, and I felt part of a community of parents who understood that sometimes love means traveling thousands of miles just to sit at the same table. The flight felt both eternal and too brief. I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagined Madison showing me her latest artwork, and Oliver teaching me the card game he'd learned at school. I pictured Sarah and me working side by side in the kitchen, finally bridging the careful distance that had existed between us for so many years. In my mind, we laughed together, shared stories, became the kind of mother and daughter-in-law that made family dinners feel like celebrations instead of carefully choreographed performances. As we began our descent into Denver, my heart hammered against my ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. The Rocky Mountains rose up to meet us, majestic and eternal, snow-capped peaks catching the afternoon light like promises etched in stone. I took it as a good omen. Below those peaks was my family, waiting for me, needing me. I checked my reflection in the phone screen one last time, smoothed my hair with trembling fingers, and whispered a small prayer of gratitude to whoever might be listening. Denver International Airport stretched before me like a cathedral, built for departures and arrivals, its soaring white tent peaks reaching toward heaven, while I stood small and hopeful beneath them. I followed the signs to baggage claim, with the determined focus of a woman on a sacred mission, my heart beating faster with each step toward what I believed would be my homecoming. Marcus had said he'd pick me up, and I could see it all so clearly, him waiting by the carousel with that sheepish grin, maybe Madison and Oliver bouncing beside him, their faces bright with the kind of anticipation that makes children forget to be still. But the baggage claim area pulsed with other people's joy while I stood perfectly still, watching families embrace with the desperate intensity of those who'd been separated by distance and longing. I saw drivers holding signs with names that weren't mine, observed the intricate dance of recognition and reunion happening all around me while I remained invisible, unclaimed, forgotten. Suitcases tumbled down the carousel like oversized beetles, each one grabbed by someone who knew exactly where they belonged. My burgundy suitcase made its first revolution around the carousel, and I let it pass, certain that Marcus was just running late, caught in Denver traffic, or delayed by some small domestic crisis that would make a funny story later. The second time it came around, I began to feel the first flutter of unease, like a moth trapped behind my sternum, wings beating against the cage of my ribs. The third time I grabbed it with hands that had begun to tremble, the familiar weight of my carefully packed hopes now feeling heavy as lead. I found a bench near the exit doors and settled my suitcase beside me like a faithful dog, its wheels still warm from the journey. My phone showed no missed calls, no text messages, no digital breadcrumbs leading me toward my family. I dialed Marcus's number with the careful precision of someone afraid of making mistakes, double-checking each digit as if my trembling fingers might betray the very thing I needed most. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, 4, before switching to that maddeningly cheerful voicemail recording that felt like a door slamming in my face. Around me, the airport slowly emptied as travelers found their rides, caught shuttles, or disappeared into rental cars with people who remembered to come for them. The automatic doors whooshed open and closed with mechanical indifference, and each time they parted I looked up with the desperate hope of a woman clinging to a sinking ship. But it was never Marcus. It was never anyone looking for a 73-year-old woman in a burgundy sweater who had traveled across 2 states because someone had said they needed her. I called again and again. On the 4th attempt, I finally found my voice and left a message, though it came out smaller and more uncertain than I'd intended. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom. I'm here at the airport, at baggage claim, just like we discussed. Maybe there was some confusion about the timing. I'll wait right here with my phone on." I tried to keep the worry from bleeding through, but it seeped into my words anyway, making me sound exactly like what I was becoming, a lost old woman with nowhere to go and no one to miss her. 2 hours passed in the purgatory of false hope, each minute stretching like taffy, until I couldn't ignore the cold reality settling around me, like fog rolling in from the mountains. The terminal had grown quiet, except for the occasional announcement echoing through empty spaces, and I sat there with my suitcase at my feet, like evidence of my own delusion, scrolling through my phone with the desperate efficiency of someone looking for any explanation that didn't involve the truth I wasn't ready to face. That's when I remembered the social media app that Madison had helped me download last Christmas, her young fingers dancing across my phone screen, while she explained hashtags and filters with the patient condescension of the digitally fluent. I navigated to Marcus's page with the clumsy determination of someone still learning this new language of connection, hoping to find some emergency, some explanation for why I sat alone in an airport while my family went on with their lives, as if I had never existed. What I found instead stole every molecule of air from my lungs and replaced it with something cold and sharp as winter wind. There, posted just 57 minutes ago, was a photograph that told the complete story of my irrelevance with the brutal efficiency of a medical diagnosis. Their Thanksgiving table was set with magazine perfection, the turkey golden and gleaming like a centerpiece in a home decorating catalog, side dishes arranged with the careful artistry of someone who understood that presentation mattered more than the heart that had been broken to create it. Sarah smiled radiantly at the camera, her arm around Marcus as he carved the turkey with theatrical precision, playing the role of family patriarch, while his mother sat forgotten in an airport terminal 2 time zones away. Madison and Oliver flanked them, their faces glowing with the contentment of children who had never known the hollow ache of abandonment, who had never waited for someone who forgot to come. 4 place settings, 4 chairs, 4 people who looked complete and perfectly satisfied without a 5th member, without the woman who had taught Marcus how to carve his first turkey. I stared at that image until my eyes blurred, and my chest felt like it might implode from the pressure of understanding. The stuffing dish, store-bought, I could tell by its uniform, industrial texture, sat in the exact spot where my grandmother's recipe should have been, where 3 generations of love and tradition should have been honored and remembered. Everything about the scene radiated warmth and deliberate joy, the kind of happiness that had no room for complications like forgotten mothers or inconvenient histories. As I scrolled through the comments section, each beautiful family and picture perfect felt like a small knife turning in my chest, twisting deeper with every artificial word of praise. Friends and relatives celebrated their family goals and their gorgeous home, but not one person asked where Marcus's mother was. Not one comment wondered about the missing generation, the woman who had raised the man carving that turkey, who had taught him everything he knew about love and family and tradition. I was invisible even in my absence, erased as thoroughly as if I had never existed at all. If this story is reaching into your heart the way it reached into mine while living it, please stay with me. There's so much more I need to share, and I have a feeling you'll understand why this journey changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and my own worth. I dialed Marcus's number 1 final time, my finger hovering over his contact, like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the next step would either save her or confirm her fall. This time he answered on the 2nd ring, and the background symphony of their celebration filled my ear like salt poured into an open wound. Laughter bright as church bells, the gentle clink of good dishes that had never been used for me. Children's voices weaving through adult conversation like golden thread through a tapestry I had never been invited to help create. "Mom?" His voice carried the cautious confusion of someone interrupted during a private moment, and I could picture him stepping away from the table, maybe into the hallway or kitchen, seeking privacy for a conversation he clearly hadn't expected to have. "Where are you calling from? You sound far away." The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us wanted to examine too closely. weighted with the distance that had nothing to do with geography. "I'm at the airport, Marcus." My voice came out steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest, though my free hand gripped the bench so tightly, my knuckles went white as the mountains visible through the terminal windows. "I'm here for Thanksgiving, sweetheart. In Denver, like you asked me to be." The silence that followed stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, and I found myself listening to the distant sounds of his celebration, feeling like a ghost haunting a party I'd never been invited to attend. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a confusion so genuine, it cut deeper than any deliberate cruelty ever could have. "Mom, we talked about maybe visiting sometime, but I never actually invited you for today." Each word fell like a stone into still water, creating ripples of realization that spread through my chest and settled in my stomach like cold mercury. You can't just show up without calling first. Sarah's parents flew in from Seattle, and we don't have room at the table, and honestly, Mom, this is really awkward timing. The sound of Sarah's voice in the background, asking who was on the phone with the mild irritation of a hostess whose perfect evening was being disrupted by unexpected complications, became the final nail in the coffin of my delusion. I could hear Oliver asking for more mashed potatoes, and Madison laughing at something her grandfather had said, and the normalcy of it all, the way their world continued to spin without wobbling at my absence, made me understand with crystal clarity that I had built an entire fantasy around a conversation that had never actually happened. I hung up before he could finish explaining my mistake, before he could offer the hollow consolation of maybe next Christmas or we should have planned better. The phone fell silent in my lap, and I sat there in that echoing terminal, surrounded by the debris of my own desperate hope, finally understanding that some truths are too sharp to argue with and too clear to misunderstand. I wasn't confused. I wasn't mistaken. I was simply unwanted, and no amount of wishing could change that fundamental fact. I must have looked like exactly what I was, a broken woman clutching her suitcase in an empty airport like a life preserver that had failed to save her, because that's when Gloria found me. She was part of the evening cleaning crew, a woman with graying temples and hands that spoke of decades of honest work, and she approached me with the gentle caution of someone who recognized devastation when she saw it reflected in another person's face. "Honey, you've been sitting here a long time," she said, her voice carrying the warm molasses accent of somewhere far south, and the kind of maternal authority that made you want to confess your sins and accept whatever comfort she might offer. "Everything all right with you?" I tried to smile, tried to summon the social graces that had carried me through 73 years of polite conversation and careful facades, but my face felt frozen, carved from stone, incapable of producing anything resembling normal human expression. "I'm fine," I lied, but she saw through me with the X-ray vision of someone who'd raised children through heartbreak and buried parents with dignity, someone who understood the geography of human suffering better than most people understand their own neighborhoods. "No, sugar, you ain't. That's okay. Ain't none of us fine all the time. But you don't need to be sitting here alone on Thanksgiving like lost luggage nobody claimed." She introduced herself as Gloria Washington, and when I explained my situation in the careful, edited version that preserved what little dignity I had left, she nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd witnessed every variety of family disappointment the world had to offer. "Family can be complicated," she said, settling her cleaning cart aside and sitting down beside me on the bench, as if she had all the time in the world, and nowhere more important to be than next to a stranger who was falling apart in public. "But that don't mean you got to spend the holiday in an airport terminal feeling sorry for yourself. Come on, let me help you figure out where you need to be." Her kindness felt like a warm coat wrapped around my shoulders on the coldest day of winter, and I found myself crying for the first time since this nightmare began. Not pretty tears, but the ugly, honest kind that come from the deepest places of pain. Gloria helped me find a hotel shuttle, even called ahead to make sure they had a room available, and explained my situation to the desk clerk in terms that preserved my privacy and my pride. As I climbed onto the shuttle with legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm with the secretive urgency of someone passing along state secrets. "That's my daughter Rose's number. She runs a little place downtown. Good food, better people. You get lonely or hungry tomorrow, you call her and tell her Gloria sent you. She'll take care of you." I couldn't speak past the boulder lodged in my throat, so I squeezed her hand with both of mine, trying to communicate through touch what my voice couldn't manage. She patted my cheek with maternal tenderness and said, "You got more strength than you know, sugar. Tomorrow's gonna look different than today. Sometimes we got to lose what we thought we wanted to find what we actually need." As the shuttle pulled away, I watched her return to her work, this angel in a cleaning uniform who had reminded me that kindness still existed in a world that had suddenly become very cold and unfamiliar. The Comfort Inn off Highway 36 smelled like industrial disinfectant, layered over the ghosts of 1,000 temporary lives, but it was clean and quiet, and mine for as long as I needed it to be. The desk clerk, a young man with kind eyes, and the weary patience of someone accustomed to dealing with travelers in various states of distress, gave me a room on the second floor overlooking the parking lot, and asked no questions about why a woman my age was checking in alone on Thanksgiving evening. With mascara streaked down her cheeks, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my suitcase with the careful reverence of an archaeologist examining artifacts from a lost civilization. The burgundy sweater looked ridiculous now, desperate and pathetic in the harsh fluorescent light that made everything look like evidence in a crime scene. The container of homemade cookies I'd brought for Madison and Oliver sat in my carry-on like an indictment, each turkey-shaped cookie decorated with the painstaking care of a woman who had nothing else to offer but time and sugar and foolish hope. That night I ordered room service, a club sandwich and tomato soup that arrived on a tray covered with a white cloth, delivered by a woman about my age who looked at me with the gentle concern reserved for the elderly and obviously displaced. I ate sitting cross-legged on the polyester bedspread in my good slip, the burgundy sweater hanging in the closet like a flag of surrender, and tried to make sense of how I'd gotten so far from reality, how I'd mistaken loneliness for an invitation. Through the thin walls, I could hear the sounds of other lives continuing, television laugh tracks from shows I didn't recognize, muffled phone conversations in languages I couldn't understand, the industrial hum of ice machines and heating units that never slept. Somewhere in this city, Marcus and Sarah were probably cleaning up from their perfect dinner. Madison and Oliver were falling asleep, with full bellies and hearts content in the knowledge that they were loved and wanted and remembered. I was less than 20 miles away from them, but I might as well have been on Mars. I pulled out my address book, that small leather-bound relic from an analog age, and flipped through pages that had become a catalogue of ghosts. My sister, Ruth, dead 5 years from the cancer that ate her from the inside out, while I sat by her hospital bed, reading romance novels aloud. My neighbor Bob moved to assisted living after his stroke, his house now occupied by strangers who didn't know he used to grow the most beautiful roses on our block. Most of the names belonged to people who were gone now, and I realized with stunning clarity that I was in danger of becoming a ghost myself, haunting the edges of other people's lives, but never really living in anyone's world. Around midnight, I did something I hadn't done since Henry's funeral. I prayed, not the formal memorized prayers from Sunday service, but the raw, desperate kind that comes from the deepest part of your soul, when you have nowhere else to turn and nothing left to lose. I asked for strength, for dignity, for the courage to face whatever came next without crumbling into dust. I asked for forgiveness for the years I had spent making myself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. And I asked for wisdom to know the difference between love and habit, between being wanted and being useful. I woke to pale Denver sunlight streaming through polyester curtains that had seen better decades, and for just a moment in that space between sleep and consciousness, I existed in a world where yesterday hadn't happened. For 30 blissful seconds, I was still a woman traveling to see her family, instead of a woman who had discovered she didn't really have one. But reality has a way of reasserting itself with the persistence of gravity, and within moments, the full weight of my situation settled back onto my chest, like a concrete blanket. I made coffee with the tiny machine in the bathroom, the kind that produces a brown liquid that bears only passing resemblance to actual coffee, and sat by the window watching early morning traffic on the highway below. Each set of headlights represented someone going somewhere they were expected, someone whose arrival would be celebrated rather than endured, or, worse yet, forgotten entirely. I envied every single driver their sense of direction, their certainty about where they belonged in the world, their confidence that someone was waiting for them. The ceramic spoon rest I'd brought for Sarah sat on the nightstand like evidence in a trial I'd already lost. Catching the morning light on its painted sunflowers, I picked it up and traced the cheerful yellow petals with my finger, remembering how carefully I'd chosen it at the little gift shop downtown, imagining Sarah's face lighting up as she unwrapped it with genuine pleasure. How thoughtful, she would have said in my fantasy. I needed exactly this for my new kitchen. Now it was just a piece of pottery with nowhere to go, an orphan like its owner. I called the airline and changed my return flight to the following day, paying the change fee with the resignation of someone who had already lost everything that mattered and couldn't be bothered to haggle over $187. The customer service representative, probably trained to recognize the voice of defeat, offered to help me find an earlier flight at no additional charge, but I declined. I wasn't ready to go home yet, wasn't ready to face the life that would be waiting for me there. The same four walls, the same silence, the same questions from Mrs. Chen about how my visit went. Instead, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity, like fog suddenly lifting from a highway to reveal the road ahead. I would not call Marcus back. I would not show up at his door with my suitcase and my hurt feelings, begging for scraps of affection or explanations that would only make everything worse. I would not make him choose between his real family and his obligation to the woman who had given birth to him, because I already knew which choice he would make, and my heart couldn't survive watching him make it with such obvious relief. For the first time in decades, I was going to choose myself. Not because I was angry, though I was, burning with a quiet fury that felt cleaner than tears, and not because I wanted revenge, though the thought had crossed my mind like a shadow. I was choosing myself because I finally understood that love isn't supposed to feel like begging for scraps at someone else's table. Real love doesn't require you to shrink yourself down to fit into spaces that are too small for your soul. Real love makes room, builds bigger tables, adds extra chairs without being asked. I remembered Gloria's daughter's number and called around noon, my hands steadier than they'd been in hours. Rose answered on the third ring with a voice that carried her mother's warmth, wrapped in the brisk efficiency of someone managing a busy restaurant during the holiday rush. When I explained who I was and mentioned Gloria's name, her entire tone shifted to something softer, more protective, like a mother bird spreading her wings over something small and vulnerable. "Mama told me all about you," she said, and I could hear the smile warming her voice even through the phone line. "She said you might need some good food and better company today. You come on down here right now. I got a table with your name on it, and I don't take no for an answer." The simple kindness of it, the way she claimed me as hers without knowing anything about me beyond my loneliness, nearly undid what little composure I had managed to rebuild during the long, sleepless night. Rose's place was a small diner tucked between a dry cleaner and a check-cashing store, the kind of establishment that survived because it fed souls as well as bodies. The building itself looked tired, like it had been holding up the neighborhood for 50 years, and was starting to feel the weight. But the windows glowed with warm yellow light, and the smell of honest food drifted out to meet me on the sidewalk. When I walked through the door, a little bell announced my arrival with the same enthusiasm it probably had for decades. Rose spotted me immediately, maybe because I was the only woman over 70 carrying a purse and wearing a burgundy sweater like armor against the world's indifference. She came around the counter and hugged me like we were long-lost relatives, reuniting after years of separation, and I let her, hungry for human contact that didn't come with conditions or expectations or the constant fear of taking up too much space. Her embrace smelled like coffee and cinnamon, and something indefinable that might have been hope. The diner was full of people who had nowhere else to go on Thanksgiving. Truck drivers grabbing coffee between shifts, hotel workers on break, elderly folks like me who had found themselves between families or forgotten by them entirely. But it didn't feel sad or desperate, the way I'd expected. Rose had strung up tiny white lights that twinkled like earthbound stars, put plastic flowers on every table, and someone had brought in a radio playing soft jazz that wrapped around the conversations like a gentle embrace. The whole place hummed with the kind of warmth that comes from people choosing to take care of each other. I ordered the turkey dinner, and when it arrived, it looked nothing like the magazine-perfect feast I'd seen on Marcus's social media page. The gravy was a little lumpy, the stuffing was clearly from a box, and the cranberry sauce still bore the ridges from its can like tiny fingerprints. But it was prepared with care by someone who wanted to feed me, and that made it the most beautiful meal I'd had in years. Every bite tasted like love, the kind I'd been searching for in all the wrong places, the kind that doesn't require you to earn it or perform for it or apologize for needing it. As the afternoon wore on, other diners joined our conversation with the easy intimacy of people who recognized kindred spirits in the wild. There was Maria, a nurse pulling a double shift at the hospital who had stopped in for coffee and stayed for the company. Her scrubs wrinkled but her smile genuine. There was Jim, whose wife had passed away 8 months ago and who couldn't bear to cook a turkey for one. His wedding ring still bright on his finger like a promise he wasn't ready to break. There was Betty, whose granddaughter was supposed to pick her up but had canceled at the last minute with some excuse about traffic, leaving her stranded at her senior apartment complex with a frozen dinner in her own company. We weren't related by blood or marriage or anything more substantial than circumstance, but we became a temporary family, bound together by Rose's excellent pie and the understanding that sometimes the people who show up for you are more important than the people who share your DNA. The conversation flowed like water finding its level, touching on everything from grandchildren to grief, to the way the world had changed since we were young, and thought we knew everything about love and loyalty and what family was supposed to mean. Rose moved between tables like a gracious hostess at a dinner party that had been 30 years in the planning, refilling coffee cups and checking on everyone with the attentiveness of someone who understood that her diner was serving as more than just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary for the temporarily displaced, a harbor for those caught between destinations, a place where being alone didn't have to mean being lonely. When she brought me a second piece of pumpkin pie on the house, she leaned down and whispered, "Mama would be proud of how you're handling all this. Takes real strength to choose yourself over people who don't choose you back." As evening fell and the lights outside began to twinkle like promises the night might keep, our impromptu gathering began to disperse with the reluctance of children leaving a playground. Frank, the gentleman who'd been sitting alone when I arrived, offered to drive me back to my hotel, and during the short ride through streets that smelled like snow and possibility, we exchanged phone numbers and email addresses like teenagers planning to stay in touch after summer camp. "You ever find yourself in Tucson," he said, his voice gentle as velvet, "you got a friend there who'd be honored to show you around." Back in my hotel room, I sat by the window and thought about the day I'd just lived through. I had woken up feeling like a discarded piece of furniture, unwanted and unnecessary, gathering dust in the corner of someone else's life. But the people at Rose's diner had reminded me that family isn't always about shared DNA. Sometimes it's about shared humanity, about the choosing to show up for each other in moments of need. They had given me something precious, the knowledge that I was still capable of connecting with people, still worthy of friendship and conversation and laughter that didn't require me to perform or apologize for existing. I called Isabellas' cell phone, my granddaughter. Marcus's daughter from his first marriage. The one relationship in my family that still felt real and uncomplicated. Not to complain about her father or create drama in her young life, but simply to hear her voice and remind myself that some connections transcend the petty disappointments of adults who should know better. She answered with surprise and delight. Grandma Dorothy. Hi, I was just thinking about you. We talked for 47 minutes about her nursing program, her boyfriend who made her laugh, her dreams of working in pediatric oncology because she wanted to help children who were fighting battles they shouldn't have to fight. The next morning, I packed my suitcase with hands that no longer shook, fingers steady as a surgeon's, as I folded the burgundy sweater that had witnessed my humiliation, and somehow emerged still beautiful. It no longer felt like a costume worn for someone else's approval. It was just a sweater now. And I was just Dorothy, not Marcus's mother, or Isabella's grandmother, or Henry's widow, but simply myself. That felt like enough, maybe for the first time in my adult life, like a revelation that had been waiting 73 years to be discovered. At the airport, I didn't scan the crowd looking for anyone to rescue me or validate my existence with their attention. I checked in with the calm efficiency of someone who knew exactly where she was going and why. Went through security without the usual anxiety about whether I'd packed something wrong, and found my gate with the confidence of a woman who had learned to navigate the world on her own terms. During the flight, I sat next to a young mother traveling with twin toddlers, and instead of feeling envious of her obvious exhaustion and equally obvious love, I offered to help entertain the children with stories and silly songs I'd forgotten I remembered. As we flew over the Colorado Rockies one last time, I looked down at the vast landscape below, mountains and valleys, rivers and roads, all of it spread out like a map of possibility, and realized that my world didn't have to be defined by other people's boundaries or limitations. At 73, I still had time to build something new, something that belonged entirely to me. I thought about Rose's diner, about Frank's email address now stored in my phone, about Gloria's kindness, and the way strangers had become friends over turkey and pie, and the simple act of choosing to see each other as worthy of care. I thought about my house waiting for me in Phoenix, the garden I'd been neglecting while I waited for invitations that never came, the pottery class at the community center that I'd been too afraid to try alone. Maybe being alone and being lonely weren't the same thing after all. Maybe I had been so focused on trying to fit into other people's lives that I had forgotten how to live my own. The plane began its descent, and I felt something I hadn't expected, anticipation, not for anyone else's approval or invitation, but for the quiet satisfaction of making my own choices and living with their consequences. Walking through the Phoenix airport felt different from my arrival in Denver, like moving through a world that had shifted on its axis. While I was gone, I wasn't looking for anyone to rescue me or complete me or explain to me what I was worth. I was simply going home to begin the next chapter of my life, one that I would write entirely for myself using ink that couldn't be erased by other people's indifference. Mrs. Chen would ask about my trip, and I would tell her it was educational in ways I hadn't expected. The relief of that realization made me walk a little taller, smile a little wider at the strangers I passed in the terminal. I had been carrying the weight of other people's expectations for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to move freely through the world. Now, with that burden lifted, I felt almost weightless, ready to discover who Dorothy was when she wasn't trying to be someone else's idea of the perfect mother, grandmother, or widow. The woman boarding that plane to Denver had been desperate for permission to exist. The woman walking through Phoenix Sky Harbor knew she didn't need anyone's permission for anything. 6 months later, as I sit in my garden watching the desert sunset, paint the sky in shades of coral and gold that would make Monet weep with envy, I think about that woman who flew to Denver with hope in her heart and desperation in her suitcase. She was looking for someone else to make her feel valuable, someone else to give her life meaning and purpose, and the validation that she mattered in this world. She was a woman who had confused love with usefulness, who had spent so many years making herself smaller to fit into other people's lives that she had forgotten her own worth entirely, like a jewel covered in so much dust that even she couldn't see it shine. I am not that woman anymore. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It grew slowly, like the desert wildflowers that bloom after rain, beautiful and resilient, and entirely their own. I had to learn that loving myself wasn't selfish, that choosing myself wasn't cruel, that setting boundaries wasn't punishment, but protection. I had to discover that my value didn't depend on being needed, that my worth wasn't measured by how useful I could make myself to others, that I could be complete all by myself without requiring anyone else's approval or participation. The pottery class I finally joined has become the highlight of my week, my hands learning to shape clay into something beautiful and entirely mine. Last month I created a set of bowls glazed in desert sunset colors, coral and gold and deep purple that catches the light like captured magic, and for the first time in years, I made something that belonged only to me, something no one could take away or leave behind or forget about. Susan, my instructor, says I have natural talent, but more importantly, she sees me as Dorothy the artist, not Dorothy the mother or grandmother or widow or any other role that required me to shrink myself to fit. Frank and I have been corresponding regularly, his emails arriving like little gifts in my inbox, and last month he came to visit for a weekend that felt like stepping into a life I'd forgotten was possible. We drove to Sedona and walked among the red rocks, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the rare pleasure of being completely ourselves with another person. There's no pressure between us, no expectations beyond friendship and genuine affection. At our age, companionship is more precious than romance, and we've both learned the difference between being with someone because you're afraid of being alone and being with someone because they add joy to your already complete life. Isabella calls me every Sunday now, and our conversations have become something I treasure more than the finest china. She tells me about her nursing program, her boyfriend who makes her laugh until her sides hurt, her dreams of working with sick children, because she wants to help families navigate the kind of fear and uncertainty she watched me handle with such grace when Henry was dying. I tell her about my pottery, my new friends at the community center, the book club I joined, where we actually discuss literature instead of just gossiping about people who aren't there to defend themselves. We're building a relationship based on genuine interest in each other rather than obligation, and it's stronger and more honest than anything I ever had with her father. Marcus sent me a Christmas card last year, generic and impersonal, signed with printed names like a form letter from a business trying to maintain customer relations. I put it on my refrigerator not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of how far I've traveled from the woman who would have treasured such a small gesture. That card represents what I used to accept as love, and I know now that I deserve so much more than the crumbs of other people's affection. Real love doesn't make you beg for a seat at the table. It pulls up an extra chair and asks what you'd like to drink, makes sure you have enough to eat, notices when you're quiet and cares enough to ask why. Rose and I talk every few weeks, her voice carrying across the miles like a bridge between the old Dorothy and the new one. And she's become one of my dearest friends despite the distance between Denver and Phoenix. She's planning to visit this spring, and I can't wait to show her my garden, introduce her to my pottery class, let her see the life I've built from the ashes of my old expectations. Like a phoenix rising from flames that would have destroyed a weaker woman. Gloria passed away in February. Cancer, quick and merciless as a desert storm. But before she died, she told Rose that meeting me had reminded her that kindness ripples outward in ways we never imagine, touching lives we'll never know about in ways we'll never understand. This Thanksgiving, I'm hosting dinner for the first time in years. Not for family who feel obligated to include me in their celebrations like an afterthought, but for chosen family who genuinely want to be here, who understand that the best tables are the ones where everyone is celebrated for exactly who they are. Frank is flying in from Tucson, Rose is driving down from Denver, and I've invited 3 friends from my pottery class who would otherwise be alone, not because I pity them, but because I've learned that the most beautiful gatherings are the ones where every person present has chosen to be there, where love is offered freely rather than extracted through guilt or duty. The ceramic spoon rest with the painted sunflowers sits on my kitchen counter now, not as a gift rejected, but as a symbol of something more important than I realized at the time. It reminds me that beauty exists even when no one is there to appreciate it, that worth isn't determined by usefulness, that sometimes the most profound act of love is learning to offer it to yourself first. I look at those cheerful yellow petals every morning while I make my coffee, and they remind me that I am enough, exactly as I am, without needing anyone else's permission to take up space in the world or breathe its air or claim my share of its sunlight. If this story has spoken to something deep in your heart, I want you to know that you're not alone in whatever you're facing. I read every comment, and your stories have become part of my story, reminding me that we're all connected by the courage it takes to choose ourselves over the comfortable misery of settling for less than we deserve. Share your thoughts below. Tell me about your own journey towards self-love, your own moments of choosing dignity over desperation, your own discoveries about what family really means when you strip away everything but the truth. Your voice matters to me because I understand now that healing happens in community, even when that community exists in the comment section of a stranger's story. And if you'd like to continue following along, as I share more of these moments of discovery and growth, I'd be honored to have you join me on this journey. Hit that subscribe button and that little bell, not because I need the numbers to feel important, but because I believe there's power in staying connected to people who understand that it's never too late to rewrite your story, never too late to choose love that doesn't ask you to diminish yourself to receive it, never too late to discover that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. Thank you to Letters to Helen for giving me this platform to share my story with women who understand that vulnerability is not weakness, but the birthplace of courage. Sometimes the most important conversations happen between strangers who recognize something familiar in each other's experiences, who understand that our stories have the power to heal not only ourselves, but everyone who hears them and sees their own reflection in our words. Until next time, remember that you are worthy of the love you keep giving to everyone else. Remember that your story matters, that your feelings are valid, that you have every right to demand a seat at any table where you're not celebrated for exactly who you are. The woman who flew to Denver looking for scraps of affection would barely recognize the woman I've become. And that, more than any family reunion or holiday invitation, feels like the greatest gift I could have given myself, the gift of coming home to who I was always meant to be.